You're live. Hey everyone, my
Awesome.
name is Kajal, and I hope you
Hi.
all can see both of us. If you can, just put it in the chat and see if you can hear and see us as well.
Hi, everyone. Let us know if you can hear us.
Yeah, and just know that there's a little bit of delay, so that's completely fine. By the way, my name is Kajal, and joining us today is Anto. She also goes by That Coding Yogi.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to start talking about these things. I recently went through a very intense interview prep season last year, so I have a lot of fresh tips and insights that might help some people.
Yeah, and like you said, you're bringing in the experience that you just went through, so you know what works and what doesn't. And we also have a lot of people starting chatting. So let's give a shout
Awesome.
out to Shahzad. Hi, I'm currently doing a course on embedded system. Hopefully, in a few weeks of time, I'll be attending interviews. Hi, Shahzad. So great to have you here. And I hope this session will help you with your interviews. Okay, let's do one more shout out to Aniket Prabhu. Hey, Aniket, thank you so much for joining us. And at any point, if anyone has questions, feel free to just drop them in the chat. We'll be going through questions, some pre-submitted ones, and also the ones that we get live here. Just make sure to use hashtag questions. It's a little easier for me to see those questions. So let's get started. My name is Kajal, and this is Anto. She also goes by That Coding Yogi. She's an amazing person that I have gotten a chance to know. And as she just said, she's recently gone through the interview cycle and she's going to be interning at Microsoft this year. So she's going to talk about how to study for technical interviews as well as her experience. So, with that, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. So, just to give a little background, I also wanted to mention that when I started studying and preparing for technical interviews, I hadn't taken data structures. I didn't really know what I was getting into. I was still considered a sophomore because I transferred from a 2 year college into a university. So I did all of my prerequisites that didn't have anything to do with computer science. So like calculus and physics and all those things that I needed in order to get into the computer science program those first 2 years. And then when I transferred in 2020, I started more with the programming stuff and programming one, programming two, data structures. I believe I had taken programming one and maybe even done some programming two stuff before I transferred, but I hadn't done any data structures yet. My first sort of contact with that was a course that I highly recommend if you're a college student, and because I believe they only accept college students, unfortunately, but it's called the Technical Interview Prep Course by CodePath. Highly recommend that. I did that for the summer of 2020 before I knew anything about data structure. So I went into the beginner tier. They have beginner, intermediate, and expert, or some sort of, it's 3 levels. I don't remember what they call them exactly, but it's sort of that kind of leveling. So I went into the beginner one. I started getting my feet wet with programming for interviews and data structures. And then after that, during August, I went all in into trying to teach myself all these data structures and how to handle them within solving problems. And then towards, I would say, November and December, I had my first phone screening with Microsoft. And then December, I had the final rounds interviews, which were, of course, virtual because of the current circumstances. And I also interviewed with a lot of other companies and I got many rejection emails. So it's not like, oh, it was this linear path upwards and I just made it happen from nothing to that. And then, of course, into Microsoft, I went in through the Explore program. So that's also something that I would highly recommend anyone that is still in school and hasn't gotten super into data structures yet. So if you're still, I believe, a freshman and a sophomore, then you still qualify for those sort of lower tier Explore programs where you do software engineering and project manager. So you can get a sense of what both positions are like, and then you can decide what you prefer and what you enjoy most. And it's also a great way to start getting prepared within the field with real life experience. I know also Twitter has one called Twitter University or Twitter U and Facebook University. So all those are really huge, wonderful opportunities for anyone that was like me and doesn't have that solid foundation yet of data structures. And then from there, I remember once I got through the final rounds of Microsoft, I was sent an email of what to focus on and what to study for those interviews. So they'll give you some sort of guidance of what topics to focus on and how to study more effectively and efficiently, specifically for what they're looking for to test you on.
So I think you already answered the first question. Can you give this, even if you are not a strong CS background? And some really great resources, I've also dropped them in the chat in case someone missed out on the word. So let's talk about this really good question that was pre-submitted. What's a good balance between attempting problems and looking up solutions?
So I actually wanted to share this one resource that helped me a lot because it was a plan that gave you a specific amount of time for trying to solve and then for looking at solutions. And you want to do both, especially when you're not super comfortable yet with problem solving. It's a blog post and video by Aline Muir, and he shares an amazing plan that I highly recommend anyone to at least check out because it worked really well for me. And maybe if you have a similar learning style, it'll work for you. And basically what he says is to set a timer for 25 minutes, allocate the first 5 minutes to understand the problem. So this is the point in a regular interview where you would ask for clarifying questions, ask about the inputs, the outputs, anything that you think could be a potential issue or something that's important to know to solve this problem. You take those 5 minutes, and then after that, you spend 20 minutes trying to solve it. And his really good tip that helped me a lot too is to do it on pen and paper instead of on the computer, so that it'll give you the chance to also work through the syntax, try to remember the syntax and see the points where you're lacking some of that knowledge. And then once you've done that, you will stop. He also recommends the next 10 minutes studying the solution and then you stop. And for the next, I believe, at the end, 10 minutes, that's when you study the solution. And he was saying not to spend more than 30 or 35 minutes trying to solve a problem. And that's something that I believe strongly in because I saw it myself, where I would, for example, before I ever knew what a hash map was if I would encounter a hash map problem, I would sit there and not really understand any of it because I didn't have the basic foundation yet. So it would make no sense to try to spend 20, 30, 40 minutes when I know that I won't really get to a solution. And at that point, I'm just wasting time. So you give yourself about 20, 30 minutes to try to solve it. If you see that you're not going anywhere, instead of getting frustrated, you stop, you look at the solution, you analyze it, and you try to see how that works and how to understand that. And then you set it aside. And the most important part here is to revisit it, maybe a couple of days after, a week after. What I did is, I don't know if I can share my screen. Is that?
Let me do multi-person. So I think now you should be able to share your screen.
Okay, so yeah, I'll share my screen so you can see what I did to keep track of that. Because the part that can get you really tripped up is if you don't revisit the problem. If you read the solution and then you think, oh yeah, I got it, I understand it. But the fact that you understand the solution doesn't mean that you can implement it yourself later on. So what I did is I would, on my Notion daily LeetCode dash, I would save all of the problems that I had done already. So for instance, here, number 26 from LeetCode. And then I would either put a check mark here if I got it right, or across if I couldn't solve it. And that would tell me, okay, you have to revisit this problem. And so keeping track of the problems that way gave me a sense of the progress I was making and what my weak points were, so that I could keep training those areas that I was lacking in.
Yeah, that's such a wonderful methodology that, sort of keep track and go back, because as you said, it's not just about looking up the solution and knowing that, okay, you understood it. The real way to test is you actually go back and solve it after a couple of days to see if it actually stayed on.
Exactly. And a lot of the times what would happen to me is I would revisit it and still not be able to solve it. And that's totally okay. And you shouldn't let that discourage you, because some problems, it just takes time and repetition to understand the process. Sometimes the more complicated ones, I would get off to a really good start and understand how to solve that at the beginning. And then towards the end, I would get really jumbled up because it was a more complicated one. So just having that mentality of this is a marathon, not a sprint, and with slow progress, I will get there.
Nice. So with that, let's go to the next question, which is how to structure your study plan. I believe you have an Excel sheet where you talk about different topics and how to approach each topic.
Yes, exactly. So that Excel spreadsheet I kind of put together while I started to study. I have a friend who was really kind and sent me a similar spreadsheet with a ton of LeetCode problems that him and his friend were doing and solving every week. So I took that and I applied it to my own studies. Let me see if I can share that. And then what I did is I posted it on my blog. So if you think that you'd find this useful and helpful, then feel free to go download it. You can use it, make it your own. It's all yours. So what I did here is I kind of laid out a study plan per week. So in my
Hey,
own
Anto, can
plan,
you just zoom in so people can see it more clearly?
yes, absolutely.
It's on your menu bar right next to copy. Yeah, there you go.
Oh, okay. Is that better?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Yeah, so on my own plan, what I did was I just counted how many weeks I had until, say, my next interview. So if you have a big interview coming up and you want to plan specifically for that one, you can do that. And then I took from, I believe it was this one. Yeah, all of the concepts that I needed to study, I set them all to 0 if I didn't know much or whatever percentage I felt like I knew. And then through that, I would follow my progress. I would add here different resources. And then from the textbooks I was studying from, I would add the chapters there. My comfort level I was adding to, and notes on what to improve, so that I wouldn't get so stuck on one topic that I would lose track of the big picture of the other things that I was missing. So say if I got really into strings and I forgot everything about array lists, and then the interview comes and I realize, oh, I'm really weak on this other thing that I completely forgot about. Because it's so easy to get really zeroed in on something. And I learned that the hard way, because I had many interviews where I would just sit there and be like, oh, I should have studied this better. And then over here, I have kind of, I think this was pretty similar to the list that my friend sent, where I have a ton of LeetCode problems and the difficulty, and then I would just mark how long it took me to either solve it or how much time I've spent on it if I didn't solve it, whether I struggled, observations, just like, oh, I should improve this one thing, or I struggled really badly with the whatever. So I kept track of that here. And then there's another tab for tracking the internships, or I guess jobs also, that you've applied to. So you can track the date when you applied to it, the company, whether you've heard back. And that was also a really nice place to keep track of all the places that I had applied to and whether I had heard back from them or not.
Wow, such a great resource. And as you said, that you sort of need to keep track of the companies you've applied to, because over time you'll forget, oh, did I apply? Or, when did I apply? And another great tip is, with this list, let's say you applied to a company by sending an email to someone or a LinkedIn message on X date. You can always go to the list and be like, okay, it's been a week, I haven't heard back. And it's a great time to follow up with this person. And trust me, follow up is a great tip, especially when you've messaged someone or emailed someone. Because sometimes, even with well intentions, they may be busy and they're like, oh, I'll do it later. And then they completely forget about it. And the moment you send that follow up, your chances of getting a response increases really highly. Trust me, it has worked for me. And that is why this is a really good resource. And the other thing I also liked is how all of her topics also are related to each of the problems. So if we look at the lead code problem sheet, you can see that, like, let's say if you want to go for linked list, you can put topic filter as linked list and have set of easy, medium, and hard level problems that you can use.
Right.
And once again, all of this is on her website, and I've included the very specific blog post that has all of these resources in the description, along with all the things that she's been telling us today.
Awesome. Yeah, I honestly kept my sanity mostly through all of this organization, and I know it looks pretty extra, but I'm also really extra about organizing. So if it helps anyone get on track to it, then it was worth it.
Yeah, I see that on the chat. A lot of people are asking. Like I said, it's included in the description. And if you can't find it, let me know. I will reshare it. And also feel free to, share these resources with your other friends, or even if you want to go on LinkedIn and Instagram, do tag her. It will help her increase her followers as well. Okay, so I think this also tunes into the next question where a person had asked, how do you suggest we study for technical interviews for very short notice?
That's a good one because it can get really overwhelming. I'd say depending on how many weeks you have, like if you have 1 week, then that's gonna probably require some extreme focus and really being very careful of what you pick to study. So in that case, I'd say look at the topics that you struggle most with. So if you're weak on dynamic programming or trees or whatever it may be that you feel you're not very comfortable with, then try focusing a little bit more on that and just doing a few problems every day until your goal date is, of a variety of things also to stay fresh. So if you have a very short timeline and you don't have a foundation in data structures, then that's going to be a bit more complicated because you want to first get a foundation and then go into solving LeetCode, which is another tip that I really live by after I attempted to go straight into LeetCode and I did not have any foundations. And then that really discouraged me a lot. So that's also something that's covered in the blog post I had shared by Ali, which is, I believe it was over here. Yeah, so he says, read this first if you're a beginner, and it takes you to this other page where it talks about how you want to first have some foundation, and he shares a list of the data structures and algorithms to study before you go and try to solve LeetCode problems related to that. But if you have a short timeline, then I would say you have to be very diligent about being honest with yourself in the areas that you're lacking, and also set that time consistently every day towards that end date. Because if you don't put in a few hours each day and then towards the tiny end of that timeline, you start to cram everything, then you're really gonna get very anxious. Probably, at least I would. So I'd say, yeah, just try to put in consistent time every day. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, I just realized
2021 thing to do.
So I was saying that she gave really good input that you have to put in the time to get the effort that you're hoping for, and you have to stay consistent and organized. Staying consistent, there's this really good theory called 1% improvement. If you put in little bit of time consistently every day and are getting better 1% every day, over time your progress will be exponentially growing.
Exactly. And I feel like it's almost as much a mindset game as it is a practice one, because if you start out and you don't work on your mindset of exactly that, of thinking I'll make small incremental progress and I won't notice it right away, but I have to believe that by the end of the day it'll be worth it and it'll compound exponentially once I'm done. If you start off and you don't work on that mindset, then you're probably going to end up at the end of it feeling like you didn't put enough work, or feeling like you didn't get to where you were hoping for.
Yeah. All right. So our next question comes from the chat. Can you share your thoughts on on-site whiteboard coding?
I would love to, but I have zero experience with that because I started interviewing during COVID. So I have no experience with on-site interviews, unfortunately.
Yeah. So in COVID, maybe you might have experienced writing on Google Docs or not a proper editor.
Yeah, so during remote interviews, the ways that they handled it was either through Codility, which is this like platform where you can code live with someone else. And also I had to code on a Google Doc straight up with no assistance from any libraries or anything, or IDs. And that can have its benefits because you're at home, so you're a little bit more comfortable. But then it can also be a little nerve-wracking too, because you don't get that, I guess, those physical cues from a person, because we communicate so much through our body language too. So I feel like I would have received a bit more information than just verbally. So I wonder if that might be something that would be different. And I'm sure that other people that have done on-site interviews and remote ones might be able to speak better on.
Yeah, I can share my experience as well. So I've done on-site interviews, and it does get a little nerve-wracking, especially because you're so used to typing on your editor where, sometimes the syntax is there for you, or, you just hit tab and it auto completes. And just being used to typing on a computer versus suddenly writing on a whiteboard can get a little nerve-wracking. And the same goes for Google Doc, right? Because on Google Doc, if you try to do tab and spacebar, sometimes it doesn't work the same way as it would nicely in an editor. So it does get to you. The one thing I would say is practice doing all of these things as well. So even when you're studying, right, as Anto mentioned earlier, that don't just solve on a computer, do it also on a piece of paper. So that way you ensure that you're actually getting the syntax, and it helps you think better and get those concepts into your brain much more easily. So that same thing helps, when you're preparing for interviews, once in a while, take a coding challenge, open a Google Doc and solve there. And that will kind of get you over the awkwardness because you've done it at least once or twice.
Absolutely, yeah. Another thing I did along those lines was I got a little whiteboard from Amazon, like a $25 whiteboard, and I started just using that at home. Even as opposed to writing on paper, because I started realizing, oh my God, I'm using so much paper. So I started using the whiteboard, and that also I noticed helped a lot and built up my confidence with the language, because I was using Java for my interviews. So I felt like I started getting to know Java a little bit better and just understanding things off the top of my head. And so I would highly recommend that too. I think I don't know if it's not here anymore, but yeah, I had also a standing one. So it just try to stand in there and solve my problems and try to mimic the experience as close as possible. Because that was the other thing. I didn't want to, even though I knew it would be remote, I didn't want to get so comfortable with just the IDE that I would then struggle to transition to something else later on, even after interviews. So I wanted to build that muscle right away.
Nice. Yeah. And one more thought that came in from the chat is how can we explain the problem approach to interview, which sort of goes into what you were just saying, that you're so used to solving the problem by yourself that you forget to talk about it, and that's not the same how it goes for interviewing. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I would first say once you start practicing, make the habit of talking to yourself. So get a quiet room, a space where you won't be disturbed, and start talking yourself through the problem. And then that's going to get you a little bit more comfortable with communicating those things. Something also that I found really helpful through my interviews was I never stopped talking while solving the problem. So I would start first with those 5 minutes that Ali had mentioned in his blog post of asking questions. So asking questions about memory, about complexity, about input, output, all these things that you can come up with, asking all those questions and starting the conversation. And then once you get all of that, don't go quiet and start thinking of a solution. Talk to the interviewer about what you're thinking. So even if you know that what you're thinking is wrong, say you'd have to use a hash map and you're thinking of an array right now and you haven't gotten to the point where, oh, I could use a hash map for this. So you just say, I know this is a brute force approach, but right off the top of my head, I would think of a hash map. I know that for X, Y, and Z reasons, it wouldn't be ideal. So I'm going to keep trying to find a different structure and way to solve this, but this is kind of where I'm at right now. And also when you get stuck, do the same thing and communicate. Okay, so here I'm stuck because I don't remember the syntax of how to apply this one method. Or I'm stuck because I feel like I could find a different approach where the complexity is better, more ideal, but it's not coming to me off the top of my head. So you're showing that you understand these concepts like complexity and stuff like that, but that maybe you're nervous right now, and they know that you're coming in terrified to these things. So they expect a certain level of getting a little stuck, and they're willing to help. At least from the experiences I've had, is that they're really there to help you and to guide you through the problem, not to trip you up. So if you can communicate well and consistently about your progression through the problem, then they'll give you better tips and hints than if you stay quiet and they think that this hint is going to help you, but you're actually stuck in a completely different thing and it doesn't help you at all and maybe confuses you more. So just getting into the habit of talking like this by yourself will make it a lot more comfortable once you get to the interview. And I can assure you 100% that that was one of the reasons why I got the interview. I mean, I got the internship after that interview, because in all my interviews, I did that. I talked through the problem. There were times where I didn't even get to a solution, or like a functioning solution that was running, but we talked through the whole problem and they got a sense of how I think, how I work with other people. And that's what they're trying to see, especially in lower level, like freshman, sophomore interviews, where they want to see how you can grow and whether you have that growth mindset. That's something really important to them, because they're looking for people that will learn on the job and that they can teach all of these industry practices and knowledge so that they can ideally grow with the company and then maybe get a full-time position there.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you. It is true for internship as well as full time. I have been in the industry for about 3 years and I've conducted a few interviews, and we do want to help you. A lot of times people think that the other person is not on your side, but the thing is, this team is looking to hire a person because they have a job that needs to be done. There are things to do, and so people think that, oh, we are not on your side, but the thing is, we want to hire you, so give us reasons to hire you. And that means that, in your interview, talk about problems and things that you're stuck on. And like she said, let's say you're thinking about using arrays, and then you're yourself saying that I'm thinking about using arrays, and I can see that this is where it would not work out, or these are the problems with using the array, so I'm trying to think of other things. And then if I know that you're understanding the limitations, as an interviewer, I'd be like, hey, what about hash maps? How do you feel about hash maps? And that will get you the hint that you need. But that only happens if you talk about it and talk about your all the problems and what your thought process is basically. And I think that
Absolutely.
puts us into the next question, which was, can you talk about your Microsoft internship interview experience?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned earlier, it started off with a phone screening. So I spoke with an interviewer there, and well, it wasn't really phone. It was sort of like this. It was a video call, and then a little codility, I believe it was, where we just did a small problem, and it was also part behavioral. And then from there, I was really nervous afterwards. I was like, I'm not sure I'll get through it. But the thing that I always wanted to leave every interview with, and what kind of helped me process the possibility of not getting things, was whatever happens, I want to at least leave the interview knowing that I had a good conversation with someone. And something like this, I'm sharing ideas with another person, and we're engaging, and I'm expanding my knowledge, and we're sharing our interests and stuff like that. So at least I want to see it as a nice, pleasant experience. And that was mostly what I was aiming for. And it happened a lot also with companies that I didn't hear back from, or that I got rejected from. And you also have to understand that there are a lot of things at play, and it's not a reflection on your worth or the work that you're putting in. Sometimes it's just there weren't any spots left, or it's just it wasn't the interviewer's best day, or who knows. There's a portion that is within your control, and it's all these things that you can study and you can prepare and you can get comfortable with speaking, and then everything else is out of your control, and you have to work on the mindset to kind of accept that. So that was my little side note. Then I heard back. I got an email back, I'd say a few weeks afterwards, saying that I had moved forward to the final rounds. And then on the final rounds day, which would normally be where they fly you out and you have your on-site interviews, that was, I believe, on a Friday, I want to say. And it took up half a day. So I started off at noon, and they would do half-day blocks. So I think other people started off earlier, and then my group started off at noon. And I had, for the Explore internship, I believe, 2 interviews back to back. Yeah. And they were both part behavioral and part technical. I coded on a Codility again, I believe. It was definitely not a Google Docs or something like super stripped down like that. And yeah, both interviewers were super pleasant and wonderful. We actually had really interesting conversations about the culture, and how, because one interviewer has been on the company for a very long time, like I think almost 10 years. So it has seen the company transition from different leadership and company cultures shifting, and different growth within also the world and stuff like that. So it was really interesting to hear from the insider perspective of that. And then with a different interviewer, we also talked a lot about the things that I'm really interested in, that I'm sure I've tired of people on Instagram pushing about it, because I recently read this book, Race After Technology, which has been really enlightening for me to see how technology affects people of other races, and how it's not benefiting everyone in the same ways that the creators would hope sometimes. And so we had a really interesting conversation about all of that. So what I would say as a takeaway from this is, speak of your interests when you're talking in your interview. Like, show who you are and let that go through, because you only have like 30-40 minutes of time to show this person who you are. You're a complete stranger, other than maybe from your resume. So this is your chance to show them what you're interested in, how you could fit within the company, how you communicate with other people. And that's another reason why I saw it so important to talk through the technical portion, because part of me also thought, okay, if I go quiet through the technical portion and just try to code, then I'm missing out on maybe 20 minutes where I could be talking and communicating and kind of convincing this person, look, I can work here. I swear I can do this.
Yeah, that is so true. It's you're not just so when someone's hiring you, they're hiring you for your technical capabilities and your soft skills and to see if you're a cultural fit. So if you don't talk about yourself and it's like, hey, yeah, give me a problem, then solve and give away, then a lot of
Mhm.
times you won't hear back because this person knows nothing about you other than the fact that you could solve this one or two problems.
Right. And at least from the little experience that I've had in interviews, I've noticed that the interviewer tends to be someone that will be in the team that you'll be placed in. So they're also looking to see, okay, do I see myself working with this person in particular? And I don't know, like when you've interviewed, maybe has that been different, or how's that experience on your end?
No, you're right, So it's like usually we'll take one or two people from other teams to get a perspective from someone else outside the team of what they think. But a good number of your interviewers will be from the team you're working for. And you're trying to see is does this person know the concepts, but it's not always the requirement that you know the concepts through and through, but that you're someone who can learn and who understands. And even if you show this much that, hey, I know these things but I don't know these things, then it can tell me that, okay, this person understands what they know and what they don't know, and they're willing to put the effort.
Mhm.
And then it's like, okay, can I communicate with this person on a daily basis, because we're going to be working together with, time's going to be like I'm working on something and you're working on different project, but we still have to merge it to the same code base and we're going to have conflicts. So I need to know that, can I communicate with you on what the
Mhm.
problems are and how we can solve it together? So like you said, it's very important to show your personality and your communication style.
Absolutely. And what you mentioned just now also reminded me that during one of my interviews, I literally told them, because they wanted to know what I know and what I don't know, especially as a sophomore coming into junior, what my level is. And they don't do this to see, okay, I'm going to ask you exactly what you don't know and trip you up, because they know we're learning, and we're still in that process. And honestly, you're always learning, even out of school. But they asked me, okay, what data structures do you know and what are you comfortable with? And I literally told them I know linked lists. I know those pretty well. I have some practice under my belt with those. I'm not super confident yet with trees, because at that point I don't think I had even seen trees, maybe, or I had seen the concept, but I hadn't coded one yet. And so after I said that, the interviewer literally asked me about linked lists, and he said, "Okay, you know this, awesome. Let's do a problem about this," because they want to see how you communicate what you know, and that goes a long way. So don't be scared about not knowing enough, and don't be scared about being honest about what you know, because if you tell them that you know something, then that's fair game, and they'll ask you about it. But if you tell them honestly what you know and what you don't know, then you're giving them the opportunity to help you and shape the interview to your own knowledge.
Yeah, I 100% agree with it. If you don't know something, don't say you know, because then they'll ask you and then they're like, okay, this person was just showing off and they didn't really
Yeah,
know. And at
that'll
the
be
same time,
embarrassing.
yeah, and at the same time, when you say, okay, this is what I know, then we can shape the interview in that direction. So with that, let's switch the gear back to studying for technical interviews. So I got this really good pre-submitted question. It would be great to know how you structured your study plan. It would also be great to know some tips on time management to juggle studying lead code problems, intense interview preparation, handling research, coursework, etc.
Okay, yeah, I'm ready for this one because it applies perfectly to my life. So yeah, while I was interviewing, I was studying full time, which I still am, working on research as a research assistant, and involved in school groups and stuff like that. So there was a lot going on, and it can get really overwhelming. So what I did was I used my document to plan out the weeks and what topic I would focus on each week. And also you want to be realistic. So don't say, oh, in a week I'm going to do 50 LeetCode problems or something like that. Or in a day I'm going to do 20
Hey, can
problems.
you share the sheet again so people can get
Yes,
more reference?
absolutely. Pull that up. Um, there we go. Yeah. So I basically, I made the plan. I populated my study plan sheet, and I would, for each day, I would set out an activity. So I would, on one day, like read the chapter for that topic. Then another day, I would do the LeetCode problems, stuff like that, and I would adjust that to my calendar. So say if I knew that one day I was taking 3 classes and I also was doing work, I wasn't going to say, okay, I'm going to do 10 LeetCode problems that same day, because that's just unrealistic. So for instance, that day, then I would read the chapter or watch a video. And that's also a huge resource that helped me a lot, was YouTube videos. Nick White in particular, he saved me on so many premium LeetCode problems that I would attempt to do, and then I wouldn't see the solutions there because I didn't have a premium account, and he would have videos for them. So that was really helpful. And then my other tip would be to do at most, I'd say 4 hours a day if you can find those 4 hours, but don't go beyond 4, because that's, first of all, it's not realistic with such a busy schedule. And secondly, you exhaust yourself, and past that point, you're not really making progress. You feel like you're putting in time, but it's not really getting you further, because your mind is probably just gone at that point. So I'd say anything from an hour to 3-4 hours if you have more time on a certain day, then dedicating that by creating the habit of doing it like daily or every 2 days, solving some problems. If you've already studied the data structures and all the technical stuff, the theory.
Yeah, it's, try to do as much as you can each day. It's over time that you will learn, and don't go beyond 4 hours, or, beyond the time limit where you can no longer absorb. Then it's like you're forcing yourself to study, but then nothing is really, getting absorbed by your brain.
Yeah, exactly. And then another thing that I found useful was I think I have it here actually. I would write the solutions by hand and then save them in a binder. I have my little technical interview binder here. So once I got a solution right and it was something that I knew I was struggling with, I would write it down, and then like before bed or while I was having dinner or something like that, I would read through the code and try to understand it and refresh it. So I would have just like my notes here of the code that so this one was merge sort implementation. So I struggled with this one for a while, and I would just keep them in my binder. And whenever I had a free 10-minute gap between classes or something, I would just sit and review this. So you don't have to be actively coding and solving a problem, just to keep that fresh in your mind.
Yeah, so basically replace scrolling Instagram with going through code from your binder.
Exactly.
Okay, so our next question, this is also a pre-submitted one. Topics to concentrate more for coding interviews and best resources for coding interviews.
Okay, so I've only done, like I said, the like sophomore and explore type of interviews so far. I've applied to like straight up software engineer internships, but I wasn't at that level yet. So I'm not the expert to say like what you should be studying. What I would say is probably take a look, I'll share again, take a look at Ali's post. Right here, he has a pretty good list of data structures and algorithms to study. And I can't remember what job position he got, but he got somewhere really cool. So I would highly suggest hearing and listening to him more than me. And then resources, yeah, cracking the coding interview was my Bible through that whole time. So what I would do was first read the theoretical part. So it has a portion towards the beginning where it explains all of the important data structures. So I went through that, I studied that. And then once I felt comfortable going into problems, I did LeetCode, like I showed in my, which I can show again, my daily LeetCode database, where I would store the problems I had done that day. So here, for example, LeetCode 88, and I would store the problem, sometimes my solution, other times like the solution for right here, for example, or optimized solution from a YouTuber, and then my really awful one. And so I could then see my progress. Keeping track of that helped me a lot because then, especially for the confidence side of things, because I would, for example, go back to a question that I did 3 weeks ago and see the old code that I had written that was really bad. And I would like even type on the title, like my really crappy n squared solution or something like that. And then I would go back with some experience and be like, oh, okay, I am improving. And I start noticing that I'm getting better. So that helped a lot. And cracking the coding interview was helpful to just sit completely disconnected from the internet, from my phone, and just sit with the book and by hand try to solve problems. And that I would highly recommend doing that. Just having no distractions and doing it by hand helps a lot too.
Yeah, you have a really good system. And I think the underlying theme here is stay organized and sort of keep a track of, because it's not just about solving problems, but it's also about did you retain what you learned and can you solve it again? Otherwise, it's like, yeah, you solved it. But then if you get lucky and you get the question that you had done, you'd be like, oh, I had done it, but if I don't, you'll feel really bad about that.
Yeah, exactly. Because it, like you said, it's not about solving the problem itself, but it's about discovering the patterns that you see. The more problems you solve, the more that you'll recognize the patterns that your mind has to follow in order to find a solution. So you never want to memorize solutions to things. You want to find the pattern of, okay, so to merge sort, you have to first do this part and then this other thing. And so when you start visualizing that, and applying that to other things, then that'll help you find the pattern to any problem that they give you. So even if you show up to an interview and you've never seen that problem before or anything similar to that, and you feel stuck, you can sit down and follow the same process that you applied throughout your whole study sessions and work your way through the pattern and talk to the interviewer as you try to reach that point.
Yeah, and I think that sort of helps answer this question. I have a general sense of algorithm, but get discouraged when I'm unable to solve HackerRank challenges. Would you have
I
anything more to add to that?
Yeah, I totally relate to that one because even especially early on when I started trying to solve problems without getting the foundation down, I felt that exact way. I would try to do LeetCode or HackerRank, and I was completely blanked out. I had no idea what to even start writing, and that was really discouraging. So I'd say uh, if you come across one that you really have no idea how to solve, um, don't put in too much time to try to solve it. Then look at the solution, but don't just look at it and say, okay, I type it out and now it works. Awesome. Move on to the next one. Do the process of reading through the solution, understanding. If you have a piece of paper or better even a whiteboard, draw out the steps, draw out your data structures, what happens when you take this one thing out or when you push something in, and understand the process, and then save that problem, and the magic happens, you go back to it, and then you try to do it again. And if you get it, then that's awesome. If you don't get it, that's also great because you know what your weak spots are, and then you can do the same process again. And after you've done that for a few times, you'll start seeing that pattern.
Yeah, very rightly said. It's great if you get it in one go, and it's absolutely fine if you took like 2, 3, or 4 turns to get it, because sometimes it just takes time and it's pattern, right? Like initially you'll feel that, but there will come a point where you'll be like, oh, I can pick up things much faster now.
Exactly, exactly, because you're building that mentality of how to approach the problem. It's not about getting the solution right away because you read the title and you remember, oh, this is how I do it. It's you sit through the problem and your brain now knows how to think through it and how to find a solution.
All right. So, one more question that we got pre-submitted was how to stay calm during a technical interview, and what should I do if I suddenly forget a simple syntax?
This is a good one too. So I I get anxious all the time with interviews. So what I've done is, first of all, to look at it the way that I mentioned earlier, to try to see it as, okay, it's fine if I don't get this. I just aim to have a nice conversation with someone. And sometimes you won't even get that kind of vibe back. I haven't had that experience yet, but I've heard some people have some complicated interviewers. I'm hoping I won't encounter that, but I hear it happens. So just trying to go into it thinking I just want to have a pleasant time and try to show who I am, and then everything else is in the hands of the universe or whatever you want to talk about. And then also to just take a few breaths before and understand that you're gonna get no's. You're gonna get so many no's. Like I have a folder in my Gmail of all the no's that I got, and I think I have well over 20 emails of just like companies telling me no, 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 and that's okay because you only need one yes, and that one yes will open a door that then with that experience, especially when you're sophomore or just starting out or a new grad even, you may not have a lot of experience, so people don't think to give you more opportunities, unfortunately, because they want to see something back in you. But once you get that one yes, then everyone will see, oh, okay, so you worked at this place or you've worked at that place. They wanted you, so why wouldn't we want you? You know, and you become a little bit more attractive to employers. And so you just have to go with that mentality that you're going to get no's, and maybe this will be a no, but it's also practice and it's preparing you for that one yes. And that's also another thing that I used to get kind of to strip down that anxiety of interviewing was applying to positions and companies that I wasn't super emotionally attached to. Like I didn't want them, like I wanted, say, Microsoft or something like that. So for Microsoft, I applied a little bit later on once I had some practice with companies that I wasn't really emotionally attached to and that I would feel awful if I got a no from. So I'm like, okay, I'll walk into this. I don't even want it. So I'll walk into it all cool and just have it be whatever. And so that helps you get a little bit more comfortable with the experience because you feel very anxious and you've been judged and like all eyes are on you and that everything relies on this one moment that, oh my God, my life is hanging on this interview, but it's not that crazy. And you can definitely see it as that growth experience of this interview will help me get more comfortable for the next one, and then that one for the next one. And it's all in the process of getting towards that one yes. And another thing is know that is a matter of time. Like when I started interviewing, and even before that, when I started studying, I knew it's just a matter of time. I don't know data structures yet. I don't know algorithms. There was a point where when I transferred, before I transferred to university, where I didn't even know what a data structure was. So I'm like, what are they going to test me on? What is this? But I knew it's a matter of time. These are skills that other people have learned. You're not born knowing these things. So if someone else learned it, I can do it too. I just have to put in the time, and at some point it'll happen for me. And I feel like if you think like that, it takes some of the stress away and some of the pressure of feeling like you either have it or you don't, because it's a skill that you acquire and you learn over time. And the fact that you get a no now doesn't mean that you're always going to get no's.
That is so true. It's, it's a series of no's that is leading to a yes. I mean, I've gotten my share of rejections and bad interviews. And I feel like the last interview I did and the company I ended up at, I feel like that interview, I could see all the mistakes I had made before and how I was not making them. And I felt like, wow, this was such a good interview. I'm proud of myself for not making any of these previous mistakes. And the one thing that I would add to it from an interviewer perspective, because I've done my share of interviews, is take that break. Especially if you have a string of interviews, the moment your next interviewer comes, if they're nice, they definitely ask you, hey, do you need a break or you want to just go into it? Take that break. Because talking about yourself is very exhausting, especially because you're feeling judged and you have to prove yourself. So take that break. You don't look bad if you take the break, like, oh, this person needs a break. It's totally normal. They understand you're human and nobody minds if you take a break to get some water or use the restroom. It's totally fine. Do it.
Yeah.
So we have few more minutes and we'll take one more question. Before that, I want to remind you all, please check out her blog and also follow her on Instagram and LinkedIn. And this is one tip I actually give, which will benefit both us as well as you. Use this session as a post on LinkedIn. So, a lot of times people ask me, how do I get more people to look at my LinkedIn profile? How do I attract recruiters? Post on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is also a social media network, right? So take this session as a place where you can go on LinkedIn and type about your experience and type about, hey, I attended this session with Anto and Kajal and these are the three key takeaways I had. This will help other students, and the moment people hit like and comment on this, it will increase the number of people who see your post and your profile. And the same goes for tagging both of us. When you tag us, my network will see your post, and that will, because most of my network knows I do this YouTube. So the moment they see this, like, oh, another student who is looking for jobs, there's a good chance that they will look at your profile. And yes, again, it'll help both of us share our resources with more students who are in need.
Yeah, and
With
also, sorry,
Go
I
ahead.
didn't mean to cut you off. Just on that same line of LinkedIn, I also would highly recommend, if there are companies that you're interested in applying to, looking through your own school's alumni and see if there's anyone that went to your school that's in that company, connecting with them. A lot of people are really willing to help. Like, I've had that experience where people that I didn't know at all would take 30 minutes out of their day just to have a conversation about how their interview went, and just because they really want to help others. And also, if you want to connect with me through LinkedIn or Instagram and ask any questions, I'm always willing to help however I can. Like, any other tips that I may have, or if you have any more specific questions, use those resources, because we're all here and trying to help you get that confidence and just kill it in those interviews.
Yeah, like we've been through it and we know the struggle. And trust me, like she was saying, right, after going into the industry, I've helped so many students from my university, which is University of Maryland. So if anyone's from UMD, go Terps. And the feeling you get, like I remember this one particular student, she got into this company, and the moment she texted me, I felt so happy. Like, yes, you got it. Like, I'm equally happy for you to get that. So, connect with your alumni and ask that, hey, I'm struggling with this. How do I get help? So, with that, let's take the last question. And it's a really interesting question. So, this one is for technical interviews that are timed. Like, you get two problems to solve and you have like 30 minutes to solve them. What's your tips for how to approach that, how to manage time? And then, are there any skills that help you, like good typing speed, muscle memory for syntax, and so on and so forth?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'd say first of all to split up that time. So if you get like 30 or 40 minutes, to spend the first 5 minutes understanding the problem. You never want to jump in straight and code, because then that shows that you're not really putting in the time to try to understand what the constraints might be or stuff like that, edge cases. So you really want to take it, even if you feel like you don't have enough time, that's going to come in very handy, because that's time that will be saving you a lot more time later on when you realize, oh, I missed this one case that now breaks my whole code. So stuff like that you can avoid with spending those 5 minutes right off the bat on preparing and asking questions if it's with someone, or if it's just a coding challenge that you've been sent, then trying to get those edge cases out of the way and stuff like that. And then from there, if you feel like you don't have enough time and it's in an interview, so you're with someone else, then I'd say pseudocode it out and have at least an algorithm that you can work through with pseudocode. If you can, and if the person, so you can ask the interviewer, would you mind if I write some pseudocode and then I can go into, because sometimes they even tell you, we're not looking for it to run today. You can just find a solution with pseudocode, and that's totally fine. Otherwise, I'd say try to be familiar with the language that you've chosen. So you get to pick if you want to do Java or Python or C+. So get comfortable, pick one when you're going to start studying for interviews, and then stick with that one so that you can feel really comfortable with it. I went with Java, and all my interviews I've done with Java, so I'm familiar with the methods and the libraries. And yeah, that's helped a lot when I feel like I don't have enough time. I know that at least I have some sort of control over the language. And because I know when I did my CodePath technical interview course, they did that course in Python. So when we first started off, I felt a little uneasy with solving problems because I wasn't familiar with Python. So you want to be really familiar and comfortable with the language.
Yeah, that's great advice. Take the time to work through your problem and know what you're going to code. And as she said, you can always ask the interviewer, is it okay if I write a pseudocode? And I also want to remind you all that 2 weeks from now, I have another session where we are again talking about technical interviews. And we have one person who's recently done interviews, and we have one person who's been conducting interviews. So we get a perspective of an interviewer and an interviewee. And the sign up link is in the description. You can also pre submit questions. And like I said, go check out Anto on LinkedIn as well as Instagram, and her blog. It's full of such useful resources. And if you missed out on any questions, you can DM us, or put it in the comment section to this video, and we'll do our best to answer that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Anto, for coming in and talking about your experience and giving all these helpful tips.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It was fun, and I hope it helps someone out there feel a little bit more comfortable.
Yes, and if you find this helpful, do tell us, even if it's few months into the future. It really makes us super happy to know, yes, this person got the job. Like, we are on your team.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you need help, if you're scared, struggling, or stuck on something, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to give some help.
Yeah, we are here as your cheerleaders.
Yes, you can do it. You got this. Positive affirmations.
Okay, there's just a little bit of delay, so I'm gonna wait for it to go through and then end the stream.
Okay.
And I think it stopped streaming.